Is this the international publication session? Where is everybody? They'll be coming later. Okay, well, we thought we were late and here we are.
Yes.
Speaker. Oh, I maybe you can't hear us. Huh? It's live. How much was your? On Tuesday. No, that's right. You have to. Well, I'm sure they did. That's been some blockbuster at 9 o'clock that people are still tied up. I don't know.
And I'm not sure.
Hi, everyone. We'll wait just a minute. Dr. Baseman to get in here, everyone to get settled.
Okay.
But great to see you all.
All two of us. Where are you?
So I'm in Fairfax at George Mason University. It's right
Oh, okay.
outside the DC Beltway.
We know it. We know it.
Oh, okay, great.
Very wacky in there.
Of course.
Yeah.
Good morning, Dr. Baseman. I hope you've had your coffee. Okay, great. You're on mute. Just
I'm here in California, and it's maybe the first sunny day in about 3 weeks.
oh,
Yeah, it's been cool, very cool, which is better than being very hot. So,
how cool are we talking?
well, for California, it's cool. 60s, 50s, 60s.
Oh, okay, that's pretty cool, actually.
See, I'm wearing a jacket.
I was gonna say, it's always interesting when Californians complain about the weather. It's either very serious or very melodramatic, in my experience.
Right, yes. Yeah, no, it's okay.
So we'll give it maybe another minute here. Is that okay?
Yeah, so we got 2 people in the audience there.
Hello.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Okay. I figured I was warning Jonathan that Saturday morning is likely to be
Sure.
pretty low attendance.
Well, we may have to still contingent. I wonder if there's anyone on Zoom.
No.
No, nobody.
Nobody.
Is there can you
They're only
I'm not hearing you very clearly, and it could be either because the mic is very far or because the connection isn't great.
Oh, look.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Wonderful.
You can hold it.
Okay.
If you have the power button down there.
Okay. So can you hear us now?
Oh, excellent.
Excellent, great.
Okay. So I'm Vicki Toller Burton from Oregon State. So thank you all for being here. And I'll just say, since there are only 2 of us, we might as well know each other.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, we'll make this much more informal. It was going to be pretty informal, but we'll make
And
it.
I'm Marty
informal.
Townsend from the University of Missouri.
Hi, Marty. It's been a
Good
bit.
morning.
So when should we start going? It's already 4 or 5 minutes into it. So why don't you, Jonathan, why don't you just start us off?
Can we see all right?
Yes,
Screen share work?
yeah,
Okay,
good.
wonderful. All right, well, good morning, everyone. My name's Jonathan Marine. I'm a PhD student at George Mason University. I'm here.
Let me also say we seem to have another person on online. Sri Charan, are you there? Can you unmute?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So why don't you unmute your camera too, if you're comfortable with that?
Yeah, sure.
And where are you joining us from?
1 minute. Actually, I'm the moderator over here, so I'll be handling over the.
You're moderating.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'm here in the room itself.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I was hoping for another person.
Yeah, we're very excited for another attendee. Well, as I was saying, I'm Jonathan Marine. I'm from George Mason University. I'm here with Dr. Charles Bazerman, who's at the University of California, Santa Barbara. We're going to present on advancing international research on writing, a report from the International Society for the Advancement of Writing Research. So a little bit of an outline, though this is very informal. We'll talk a little bit about the history of ISAWR. Dr. Bazerman's going to speak to some of the challenges in history of research and writing across the curriculum. We're going to focus on the ISAWR publications which have come out of the conference proceedings for a bit, but what we're really mostly interested in is learning about you, who you are, what challenges you're facing, and sort of discussing as a group. So,
and if I could add,
please.
one of the underlying intentions of this is to help create a stronger bond. I call it eyesore, but nobody, I didn't know, it hasn't taken with anybody else. But it is meant to be, it started out as an umbrella organization because there are many regional organizations of many different kinds. And in different countries and different regions, there are different groups devoted to writing. All the kinds of research being done globally. So it was meant to be an umbrella organization, but it's not a simple umbrella with all the same kind of constituents underneath. So we have to been working very slowly to try and forge relations with different groups. And that's why, and this session is part of it, to explore the common interests with IWAC and ISOR, and to think about what kind of cross-fertilizations and collaborations might emerge, just as we've been working with a number of other organizations. And I should also say that although I founded the organization and grew out of conferences we were running at Santa Barbara, I am now entirely off the board. Jonathan is secretary, treasurer of the organization, but I'm not functionally in the leadership in any way of the organization. So, and such, I'm free to speak nonsense, I guess. That's the meaning of it, but it's, yeah, I've been off for a number of years now, because I'm getting old. Okay, so back to you, Jonathan.
Well, a couple things to say. First of all, Chuck, still spiritually, metaphysically, I'm struggling for the right term, a huge part of the society still to this day, as much as he might demur. I want to just go over some basic pragmatics, but I'd like to ask, for those in the room, have you heard of ISWAR before? Have you been to any of the conferences? What does it mean to you? Before I launch into sort of an explanation, it'd be great to know. Any thoughts?
I'll speak up. I
Please.
believe, I don't know if you count it as the first, but there was an initial one that I think of as being in the series at Santa Barbara. And I was at that one. I was also at the one in Paris.
Okay,
Great.
I look forward to being at more.
wonderful. Does anyone else want to share? And no big deal, just wanted to ask.
I know what it is, but I haven't been to one. So I'm the naive audience member who looks for new information. Christy?
I'm the most junior. Right here, Professor Chuck Paisman. I'm from City University of Hong Kong. So I'm, yeah, from the Language Center. So
Oh,
I hope I can learn a bit more about what kind of conferences that bring people who are interested in writing research. Yeah, like this one.
Yeah, I know that at one point, I'm sure there've been a lot of changes that have gone on, but I know the center. At one point, I knew the center pretty well. Yeah.
Well, wonderful to hear there's both sort of people, ISWAR members, new and old, in the room. I'll quickly go over. It was founded in 2011. The International Society for the Advancement of Writing Research is typically called either ISWAR or ISOR. And I was going to say that even before your sort of explanation early. Both are correct, is all I want to say. ISOR, ISAR, there's no incorrect pronunciation. And it is an international writing research association. You see in quotes here from the mission statement, devoted to the development of interdisciplinary research into the many dimensions of writing and learning of writing of people of all ages and languages. Dr. Baserman can speak to this much more adeptly than I can, but I'll tell you in my impression, I think of ISWAR as big tent writing research, inclusive of the many different methodological and theoretical orientations that are found in different regions of the world. I think I could say, without disparaging anyone or anything, some associations privilege different approaches or different sort of methodological orientations. And I think I'm right in saying that ISWAR really tries to honor all the different types of writing research going on across the world. Did you want to add anything, Chuck?
No, that's in fact, and some of the approaches have seen more common cause than others that have their own very strong methods and orientations and tend to they've been more than busy with their own conferences, let's say. So it's a long process of trying to bring communication between all the groups and share the research. And let's say writing is a really complicated, multidimensional thing, and to understand it and to research it in all its dimensions requires a lot of different approaches. And a lot of contrast because it's so individualized, institutional context, national context, pedagogical theory context. It happens within a lot of specific context. But then even within those contexts, it has everybody goes their own path. So it's not easy to pin down. of all the different dimensions, all the different variables, all the different pathways. So it really is an enormous research undertaking. And right now, and since the formation of the organization, we're just trying to bring as many people as we can into the conversation so we can appreciate what it is that we're each looking for. Everybody is looking for something, and they are seeing something. If they are collecting data, they're seeing something. Now, what it is and how it relates to the other things people are seeing, that's an interesting set of questions. Right. So, and so no one method captures it all. And that's why we need this very large umbrella and set of relationships throughout the world, all ages, all methods, all kinds of institutional contexts, and let's say post-educational institutional contexts as well, or extra educational institutions. Okay, yeah. That's enough. You can get
No,
back to
I think it's
agenda.
very well said. And at the core, maybe arguably at the core of what ISOAR does is sponsor a regular conference every 3 years. The most recent conference was in February in Trondheim, Norway. The next conference is in 2026 at the University of Sydney, Australia, and we hope you'll join us. You know, ISOAR also produces conference volumes, and you can find a lot more information about ISOAR at isoar.org, the association's website. I want to just cover one other aspect here while we're talking about the society, and that's the current leadership, just inaugurated, just elected in February at the RAB conference in Trondheim. You'll see, and again, Dr. Baserman can speak to this much more depthly than I can. What began as a really
I'm going to get in a minute.
Say that again. I'm so sorry. All right, I'm going to keep speaking till we get Chuck back on the line here. I was just going to say what started as a North American association has really burgeoned into a truly international association of writing research scholars. And you see here, I think we're all very proud that the current leadership board is so internationally representative. That didn't happen overnight. And it's an important and ongoing effort that's at the core of ISOAR. Current chair, Dr. Chris Anson, immediate past chair, Dr. Tian Donahue, and incoming chair in 2026, Dr. Rui Alves. I'm sorry, Chuck, I think you're back if you wanted to add. And you are on mute. You're on mute, Chuck. You're on mute.
My system automatically switched me to a very bad server, and now I'm back. I hope I've got the right server. The one thing I was going to add,
Sure.
and you might have gotten to it. Another thing the organization is planning to do, which you're going to get to, is that it's planning on starting a journal, and so that's going to be an important extension of its function.
Yeah, a major development for ISOAR, and very exciting, I think, for a variety of reasons. And as we'll see as we kind of go through these conference volumes, ISOAR has been a venue for research on WAC, international research on WAC, research on other related programmatic concerns and writing in the disciplines. And I would foresee that the journal will be another venue for similar types of research, which might be quite interesting to WAC professionals.
Okay, so I'm going to talk for a few minutes about WAC's interest in research, and then in a few minutes after that, Jonathan's going to be going over some of the conference publications that have identified a number of these intersections already that have already been coming to the conferences. And Marty, for example, has been coming to the conference. So that indicates it. So IWAC, like quite a number of writing-focused organizations globally, is program and practice-based organization. And most everybody in the profession is hired in some version to support writing in a practice-oriented role, which are then organized in programs. So it makes us a lot of sense that most of the organizations are practice-based, like the 4 Cs, ETOR. But so the question is then, where does the research come in? Is there a value? Is there for research in the field? And where would that meet? Now, most of the organizations now have an increasing amount of research, but it's still at the margins of most of the organizations, not all of them, but most of the organizations. Some are higher ed, some are K through 12 or primary, secondary ed oriented, some are professional writing oriented. But again, it's almost all practitioners with only small spots of research. So as a program based organization, IWAC has interest in institutional assessment. You've got to prove to your institution you're doing a good job, you deserve more money, you deserve continuation, whatever it is you're looking for institutionally. And you're also constantly trying to improve programs. So those could be local, of local interest. It's and sometimes there are surveys that gather together what's happening locally at the various sites to create a regional picture. And Jonathan's going to talk about a couple of those. He's going to mention a couple of those. But sometimes in doing that work, you find something that might be news to some other campus, some other program. It's a value. You found something that's not just the particular conditions, or there's a strategy you found, a practice you found, which might be of more general value, or you've come across some phenomena about your students and something that you understand about them that might be characteristics of students elsewhere, something about development during the college years. Okay. There's an interest in the writing practice and expectations across the campus, including the instructional support, what's happening in the other disciplines. Again, that could be local, but you could be finding out something also of more general interest. Interest about how students write beyond the classroom. See, composition courses initially were viewed as kind of isolated things. And maybe just, well, you correct the grammar, correct the spelling, you set certain expectations, and you're done. But WAC was part of a recognition that no, writing serves a lot more and is different in other venues, and so we need to look both at what's happening in the other classroom, but then that led to what's going to happen in the professions, in their careers afterwards, and also what else are they doing in their writing. There was a session yesterday on life-wide writing, and how that might intersect with the educational component. Then there's also an interest in WAC about how do students change, how do they adapt to, how do they make sense about their academic writing expectations, and how do they develop and change across their writing experiences in their various courses. And particularly outside the US, as you're probably becoming aware, as IWAC has become more and more international, the US model of a kind of a modal required writing course is, and which is based in general ed, is not at all the standard model when you get outside the US. And it's more typical that people, their whole curriculum is guided by their major or their career. And it's specified in their career. So the relationship to the disciplinary practices of the field become very important. And in a sense, all writing is writing in the disciplines, across the curriculum, in the disciplines, however you want to consider it. So again, to understand what's going on in that and how do students develop academic identities and disciplinary identities or career and professional identities through their writing. Then how are the writing supports and programs, institutional arrangements related to the different structures of the different universities and the different majors? And again, there's this things that we need to find out. That's research. There's actually, I should have said within this, also students not only go to different places in the university and then after the university, they come from different places. And so what is the relationship of university writing experiences to the secondary and primary writing experience, and how do students develop across these, and which gets more to the lifespan notion. So WAC has a lot of interests in research, and a lot of research turns up as you find out things that you need to carry on your programs or to do your programs better, right? This doesn't exhaust the range of writing research, but it does. It's this part of writing research which is very salient for WAC. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of ISOR and the RAB conferences. There seemed to be a real energy, need, desire for more research orientation. I know I experienced that throughout my career at the Seas, where research was always at the margin. Now it's becoming a little bit more central, particularly assessment pressures were one of the drivers of it. So in 2002, we ran a small conference which was research underlying it, but we didn't even use the research in the title because we didn't think there would be that many people interested in overtly, explicitly interested. But it was meant to be regional, just within California, one day. Interestingly, we started to draw nationally for that. So the next one, we said, okay, we're going to use the word research, but we're going to still say, well, it's something that we're making. Maybe it's kind of a little bit guidance, hand-holding. So it's called was writing research in the making. And that started to draw actually internationally. It got a lot, both of these were much larger than we anticipated. So then we say, okay, it's international, let's call it across borders and across ages, or across all kinds of borders. and it became even larger. And we were kind of astounded by that. It stretched the capacity of UCSB to host something. Anyway, so at the one after that said, okay, there's really a demonstrated desire for an organization like this. This conference really seems to be attracting a lot of people from a lot of different regions. So at the 2011 conference, which we finally got to move from UCSB to George Mason, Paul Rogers was organizing that one. At that meeting, we laid the groundwork for the formation of this organization. Okay, and then we took it international in in 2014 to Paris, which also set a kind of model, because it set it was a big step forward because, one, it was a bilingual conference. It was French and English. Before it had just been English. And also it drew very strongly on networks out of France, Northern Africa, Francophone, all the Francophone regions, and the publications which came out of it had a very strong Francophone component, and articles appeared, and Jonathan will get into that. We continued into Bogota in 2017, which is a lovely city, but not quite capture the imagination of people as Paris does, unfortunately. But still had a good attendance, and again, it was very strong regional. So there was an international component, and then there was a South American regional component. China was also intended to follow that, and that same kind of model, and be region building for China. Unfortunately, the pandemic intervened, and it got moved to an online conference the following year, and then met in Norway. So now the organization seems pretty established and stabilized, and which also is, there's more of a general recognition of the value of research, and they're actually more research-oriented small organizations that feed into it. Like I'm most aware of, like the Lifespan organization. There's good participation from the some of the writing research in the US, from some of the European, but SIG writing from the European Association of Educational Research is very strong, and they share some of the space with us. And Sydney, next time, Australia, there's been a development. As I was talking with Jonathan, it's going to be very interesting because, and probably City University of Hong Kong, you're very aware of this too, that the linguistic orientations and applied linguistic research has been kind of dominant in Australia and actually throughout a lot of Asia. So it'll be very interesting. And they have been a group which they've had their own very strong network. And we're hoping to be able to draw them in more into dialogue at this conference. We'll see what happens with that. Okay, so that's the story.
Now, so we're going to transition here into talking about the conference volumes from these conferences. And just to start off with sort of the first 4 volumes, which you see here came from the first 4 RAB, Writing Research Across Borders conferences in their respective locations. The first volume, I should say, a part of what we want to do here in reviewing these volumes is show, as Dr. Baserman was suggesting, the sort of regional inflection that each of these conferences have taken and how that shaped the different conference volumes, but so too the sort of pervasiveness of disciplinary perspectives, of explicitly WAC and WID based work that you'll find across really all of these volumes. It's quite salient, and it shows the intersections and potential intersections of international writing research and international writing across the curriculum initiatives quite aptly. So this first volume, Traditions of Writing Research, is notable for a couple different reasons. First of all, it's the only non-open access conference volume. This first volume, published by Routledge in 2010, based off the 2008 conference in Santa Barbara. And it presented writing research agendas from across sort of regional contexts and research traditions that attempted to address the different contexts from which that writing research emerged, national, historical, political, or otherwise. One of the things I want to point to as we go through these volumes is the different organizational schemas, which I found very interesting. This had a very grade level based organizational schema. Research was organized into sort of primary, secondary, and then higher education contexts, and rounded out with this issues in theoretical and methodological, or theoretical and methodological issues in writing studies. As we look at the specific chapters that might be of interest to those of you who are WAC professionals, there's a wonderful chapter by Chris Tice, which is a survey of the prevalence and proliferation of WAC programs, which they undertook in 2008 as a follow-up to an initial survey, which I believe was actually the initial survey of WAC prevalence and proliferation from 1988, that of course showed in sort of stark detail how much WAC had grown during that time period. And I'm very excited to share, if you're maybe already aware of it, that this project is ongoing. The website's still functional. It later on progressed into a survey of international WAC that it has a lot of interesting sort of implications, I think, for contemporary contexts of WAC work going on in today's day and age. There's also chapters on student writing in the disciplines, including oceanography and the social sciences, exploring academic literacies in text-based computer conferencing. Before I go to the next volume, anything you want to add, Dr. Baserman?
No, I think, and these are some samples. Actually, we could, there are more in each of the volumes, more than we're showing.
Yes.
That WAC WID oriented. And let me also say that in a lot of the research and explicit hiring around writing is in higher ed and beyond. Higher ed, graduate writing. It's been a challenge to try and bring in more of the primary and secondary, but we've been doing it each time. And in the first one, okay, the differing organizations of these are part of the difficulty of how do we wrap our arms around the fullness of writing research. And there are so many different ways even to do that. And each of the volumes, we've tried different ways in order to match what the interests have been at the moment. Yeah.
So in this second volume, International Advances in Writing Research, Cultures, Places, and Measures, very happy to share it was published in 2012 by the WAC Clearinghouse. I'm just going to show really quickly. It's still up, fully functioning. All of these chapters are available on the wonderful WAC Clearinghouse website in case you'd like to check them out. The this was, of course, the conference, as Dr. Bazerman was saying, at George Mason, where ISOAR was actually founded. And the organizational schema took a different approach and really related to this cultures, places, and measures grouping that was different, as we saw, that is different as we saw from the first volume. And there are several interesting chapters of note in this collection as well, starting with sort of early history of Australian higher education academic writing instruction. A very interesting chapter from a Scandinavian scholar on internet writing in educational settings in Norway. There's also a wonderful chapter here on the production of scientific papers by PhD students in a Mexican physiology laboratory. And then a chapter by, a well-known scholar, Clay Spinuzzi, sort of tracking work, beginning the work of tracking workplace writing and the different genres which students and professionals are tasked with mastering or learning to master, especially in that transition from sort of the schooling years to professional and workplace writing. Anything you'd like to add, Chuck?
No, that's fine.
Okay. So third volume here, Research on Writing Multiple Perspectives, which I'll just take a second to show you, also up on the WAC Clearinghouse, also in open access. We're very happy to share. Published in 2017, based on that 2014 conference in Paris, France, which was very well attended, as Chuck shared. This was the first, it's important to note, this is the first multilingual volume by ISOAR based on the RAB conference proceedings. All abstracts were in French and English, and articles were either in French or English, which was
In the paper volume.
yes.
Okay, it's the issue of language is complex,
Yes.
and the French editors were actually they wanted, for their reasons, they wanted a French and English volume to show that France was an equal part of the research world, but they also wanted, for the online volume, they wanted it all available fully in English, to make their work more widely known. So that's why you have this unusual difference between the between the paper and the online version. It's every conference volume has been grappling with the multilingual issue, and they come to different solutions on each volume.
And all multilingualism is sort of a prevailing value of ISOAR and RAB. And there's been a general impetus to try and publish research in multiple languages, in the language of origin of where the research was taking place. But that comes with a lot of challenges, as Dr. Baseman was just hearkening to. It's not easy, I guess is what I'd say in short, to produce multilingual volumes across a variety of levels. And it's something I think that ISOAR is continuing to commit to, and continuing to try and address the challenges therein in differing ways. It's sort of surprising when you're trying to produce multilingual research how challenging it can be, both in translation and editing, the format and genre. There are a lot of implications that come with those efforts. And it's very interesting, as Dr. Baseman was just saying, French scholars wanted work in French, but also in English. There are also there are all kinds of prevailing concerns that come with multilingual publishing of research in general and writing research specifically.
And this is also not just about the language the articles appear in. This is also about the language of the writing that's being researched, because that's really fundamentally important, that writing happens in many different languages, and the national and linguistic contexts are very important to the way writing develops and the uses of writing within each of those societies. So and by having more multilingualism of the articles, we're also encouraging more multilingualism of the writing studied.
And I'll point out, and speaking to the organizational schema here a little bit, this volume expressed an intent not to present necessarily a panoptic vision of research on writing, but more so to create a dialogue amongst the different facets, theoretical, methodological, and otherwise, of writing research taking place across the globe and in specific regional contexts. And I think what Dr. Baserman was speaking to before, the complexity of writing, the idiosyncratic nature and specificity of how it takes place in different contexts. We see that, I think, a little bit of not tension, but these different organizational schemas speak to that. I think it's very difficult to categorize or taxonomize these different contributions in these different volumes in context with one another. And I think that's a part of why we see this sort of evolving organizational schema across the volumes. It's not easy. It's really not easy to categorize them necessarily cleanly based on the wide range of different contributions that each of these volumes have had. So some very interesting work in this volume. Writing in the content areas by a group of Scandinavian scholars, academic literacies and disciplinary subjects by Kate Chinook. Very interesting chapter here by a French scholar, chapter 17, about writing identity in the transition from schooling to the professional world. And then another chapter here on reading to write in science classrooms by Paula Carlino and a colleague. All of these chapters very focused on writing in the disciplines, the transition from the schooling years to professional writing, and very much a venue, I think, for that sort of intersection of WAC and ISOAR, International Writing Research, and writing across the disciplines, writing across the curriculum. That we would think is of interest to WAC scholars, and also a potential venue for WAC research. So that brings us to knowing writing research across borders. Also quickly just show you again up on the WAC Clearinghouse in open access. This volume was published in 2019 based on the 2017 RAP conference in Colombia. This was also a multilingual volume, articles either in Spanish or English, which was the author's choice, and then abstracts for all the chapters in Spanish and English. This conference took place in Latin America, and the volume has a sort of regional inflection to it, a focus on new approaches to writing globally, but with a heavy emphasis on the development of writing studies in Latin America, which Dr. Baserman has been a big part of and is very instructive for the emergence of writing studies in other regional contexts as well. So talking about organizational schema here for a second, there's no sections in this collection, and there are actually no chapters, which I think is really interesting as we're talking about this sort of the challenges of categorizing work in context with one another insofar as writing research. Several interesting chapters here: academic literacy in Portuguese schools and universities, a wonderful chapter by Dr. Baserman on disciplinary academic writing, and then two chapters, a chapter here on the specialized lexis required by students in literature, and then two chapters very disciplinarily inclined, one for mathematics students and then one for industrial engineering students. So that brings us to the most current conference proceedings. For the first time ever, the conference proceedings were published as a special issue and not a conference volume. Very happy to share this is also open access in a wonderful Latin American journal called Literatura y Lingüística, which is a Scopus indexed scholarly journal, very well known in Latin American writing studies. We were looking through the contributions in this special issue, which of course didn't have an organizational schema because it was a special issue in a journal, not a book or a collection. And really all of them felt very disciplinarily inclined. This first chapter by Montserrat is trying to investigate how PhD students manage their identity and the writing processes inherent to writing their dissertations across a couple of different disciplines. I'll let Chuck speak to, he made a very interesting case for his chapter on the early use of cuneiform in the Chinese Imperium and how that relates to WAC and writing in professional disciplines. The chapter I want to just point to that I think unintuitively might be very much of interest to WAC professionals is this paraphrase chapter makes the case that mastering paraphrase is sort of an inherent embedded part of how students learn to write in higher education and in the disciplines and sort of beyond. And it's not terribly well defined. And it makes it's interestingly very much a part of how it seems to be a part of how students are negotiating writing in higher education and generally and in the disciplines specifically. Also, a couple of chapters here on job application letters, sort of that liminality between the schooling years and professional writing, and Vietnamese students' vocabulary and thesis writing. Do you want to add anything before I continue, Chuck?
Well, I was just, you
Please.
said I had
Yes.
a rationale for, so in the earliest, not the earliest, but the next earliest uses of writing, as it started to elaborate, you start to see the rise of different professions and different social functions, which now we might say might be attached to, and they were often mediated. They were mediated through scribes and the scribal classes. So early Middle Eastern societies, you start to get issues of religion and poetry, governance, praise of kings, astronomy, astrology, the tax collection. you had all these different functions arising, which are the modern, the basis of many modern professions, and we might say the majors in colleges. And in China, a lot was devoted to governance and keeping track of citizens and maintaining and keeping track of law and order, and the administration of justice within China. It's again, these are all modern societies have some version of this, and so it's really interesting to see how the modern organization of life starts to emerge in conjunction with writing and the texts that kind of inscribe the infrastructure and infrastructurally administer these various forms of knowledge and social practice. So that's why I think of it as very much early WAC, pre-WAC, but not everybody yet sees that. They will.
So that brings us to the most recent conference. I'll just give you a little bit of a taste of the experience. So the conference was hosted kind of over here by the sea, and we had this wonderful walk in a blizzard to this very old church for a sort of private organ concert. It was a remarkable experience. I'll add one other detail here. There was a polar bear dive at 6 a.m. in the ocean. It's a little bit out of the frame of the picture. And I just want to say the primordial proto-simian screams of conference attendees as they went into these frigid waters will be emblazoned on my mind for the rest of my life. It was an extraordinary experience, jumping in this frigid water, going to the sauna to warm up, and sort of back and forth with cod liver oil shots first thing in the morning. I took a nap, the deepest nap I've ever taken in my life once I got back to the hotel. An extraordinary sort of cultural experience that we hope will continue in Sydney in 2026 with all of you. So the conference proceedings received several different proposals, which we're in the midst of sort of reviewing and going through, slated for a 2-volume open access collection with the WAC Clearinghouse. We're very happy to share in coming times. Maybe the biggest news, light on details on this slide for several different reasons, because there are a lot of prospective details to nail down. But ISAWAR has voted to establish an international, multidisciplinary, multilingual, open access scholarly journal that attempts to honor the traditions of writing research across borders broadly conceived, which we see as a wonderful future venue that we hope you will keep in mind and refer to, that will, of course, include work that is programmatic and WAC inclined, and that is a potential publication venue for all of you doing wonderful work in writing across the curriculum.
Okay, so Chris Anson also in some emails pointed out some of very similar kinds of comments. The second one, okay, well, first one is that he points out that WAC is still underrepresented, even though it has been growing, as Chris Tace documented. Still, it's still it's not been the favorite, the most common increase in writing support, which has been writing centers. And as he said, it's worth talking about. And part of this is the insularity of the disciplines or careers or departments, faculties that have developed in the universities that don't have a general education model. For those of you in the US, you may be surprised to hear things could be even more insular among departments, but they are in fact, and faculty in other departments are even more resistant to WAC than they have been in the US. And so IWAC and ISOR can perhaps work together, even though, as I'm pointing out, that a curriculum is organized by disciplines and faculty, so that's the way you more or less have to go with it. The writing centers without a writing program and without a strong WAC component tend to remain on the margins. So you've got to somehow increase the expectation of more writing in the disciplines and engaging the faculty in other disciplines. There's still many places, as I'm sure some of you know, that are basically test oriented, and those are the basic assignments. There's very little in the way of regular papers, regular assignments. Okay. His second point has to do with the kind of alliances we've been trying to build, and we certainly hope that IWAC starts thinking about that, and we have a few minutes left today, and that's maybe one of the topics we discuss. And that, and I think the I think the other point, last point, is an important point that Chris makes, but I'm not sure about the intersection with ISOR here. The WAC ambassadors, which I think is which is within the IWAC or ambit mostly. Okay, so now we have a few minutes left, about 15 minutes left. And we don't have we have a small group, let's say. We constitute a small group. So these are some of the questions we might talk about, but we can talk about anything that you want that seems to arise from this. what are the kinds of research you're carrying out in your program that might be of more general interest? I know Marty has been grappling with this issue for many years and has come to some solutions. Is there something that you would like to know to carry out your programs or teaching better? I know in my own career, it was the curiosity. So what is happening in those other courses? And how are those related to the disciplines? What's going on in the disciplines that lie behind that coursework? That was a very driving, important question, and that led to many other questions. More practical question is, do you have an idea for the next RAB conference? And then what kind of collaborations do you see between IWAG and ISOR? So those are some of the things you want to talk about. So we're open for any kind of discussion.
And I'll know we've got some more people who've joined us online. Please
Yeah.
feel free to raise your hand, unmute. We're happy to discuss.
Yeah, please, everybody unmute, and you don't have to raise your hands, just talk. We're small enough.
I'd like to know whether an editor has been named yet for the new journal.
Not officially. And I'll just say, I don't want to get
Sounds
my
like that you have someone in mind and it hasn't been announced yet.
yeah.
Makes
So
it all the
I'm
more mysterious and interesting.
I know I'm really not trying to be cloak and dagger. I don't want to get my knuckles wrapped for revealing anything that isn't officially condoned. I would say that you know, the international leadership that you saw that's a part of the board are all actively discussing and very interested in what is kind of the foremost new initiative. And nothing official has been announced yet. But I'll add, there's going to have to be a pretty large editorial team for this journal. And so there's a lot of degrees of involvement and opportunities for involvement to be hashed out. So I'm sorry if that's a terribly mysterious answer.
It's okay.
Okay.
My question is, do people ever present research projects in progress, or do they all need to be finished and, you know, done and ready to be published in the last version?
Is this-
I would. No, the conference papers are always in progress, and there's also there's an additional layer on that. I'm not quite sure. The call has not yet come out for proposals. When I was running the show, I want to give people a very long lead time so that they could gather together their funding and make their plans. So we had papers were proposed about a year ahead of time, which meant that inevitably things were in progress. And also there are increasing numbers of kind of workshop participation, work in progress sessions, as well as papers that are presented sort of as finished, but not really finished. Right. So there's yeah, no, you can propose anything. By and large, though, you have to have some kind of plan for systematic data gathering, and that's kind of the semi-official definition of research.
Yeah,
That-
thank you. Thank you.
Marty here with one more comment about what I might like to see at a future ISOAR conference. My own personal interests in WAC research have always landed at the institutional level rather than the individual student and individual classroom level.
Mhm.
That is, in particular, I've been interested in how does an institution or a WAC program secure rock solid continuing support from its higher leadership, from its administrators. We know that philosophical and fiscal support from them is absolutely mandatory in order to have successful programs. I'd like to know how programs around the world go about securing and maintaining that kind of support from institutional leaders.
That's a great topic for a panel.
Yes.
And programs that have managed to be funded or failed to be funded or continued in different regions might provide instructive stories and lead to a great discussion.
And then last, I'd like to add, if I may, for Dr. Bazerman's benefit, mostly I think, we at the University of Missouri claim to have offered the first international WAC conference. That is to say, the WAC conference was national up until 2004, when we hosted our conference in St. Louis and declared an international theme.
Mhm.
The organization wasn't called International WAC at that point because the program organizers felt that we didn't have enough grounding yet to call it IWAC, and they wanted to see what would happen. As it turned out, over 10% of our attendees and papers came from international participants. And it was the following year then at Clemson that it was the organization or the conference was formally renamed IWAC. And we're very proud to have offered that very first international focus on what was going on in the field of WAC.
Yeah, I
sound that horn often to keep reminding folks where that started. And I want to pass the mic on to the next speaker.
Thanks for reminding us of that history. I know that WAC has early on been engaged with trying to internationalize and dealing with some of the challenges and in doing that, and has been a leader in that. And I think the writing centers followed a little bit after as well in internationalizing, formally internationalizing.
Hi, I have several questions. I have to admit that my engagement with the writing research across borders is not that much, but I did attend the 2021 conference. So my first question is about the research topics. So for both the conference and the upcoming journal, I was just wondering whether like certain topics, for instance, Dr. Bazerman, you listed, you have a list of research interests, right? So among those interests, any particular topics or any particular interest that you see have a stronger presence than others in those conferences? That's my first question about the research topics presented in the conferences, or with the upcoming journals, what kind of topics will be more privileged than others?
Well, the privileged is maybe the wrong concept. I think
Right,
what gets
for better of lack of word.
what gets
I admit.
offered, what gets evaluated is what's presented. So as I mentioned, and I don't know whether this is currently the focus of these the writing center at City University, but I do know that SFL, systemic functional linguistics, and more generally functional linguistics, has been, and applied linguistics have been very influential in the region and at the Writing Center when I visited. And they are welcome, but we've had relatively few proposals from that. I mean, which is kind of odd because people do use language. Writers do use language. And it has much to offer to other strands of writing research. So if that's your question, I'm not sure about whether linguistics and applied linguistics approaches would be well received. I'm sure they would be. There might be a desire to consider how that intersects or contrasts with other approaches, but or what it has to offer with it. So we have had, there actually have been quite a number of presentations about second language writing, and a number of those are linguistically oriented, and also some of the emergent literacy, like the work, name's escaping me right now, Taborski. Anyway, some of that work has been very much about linguistically oriented. So no, nothing is looked on more favorably. It's what is looked on as though is what is presented for us to look at. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
I'll jump in really quickly to say, I think trying to gesture out a little bit during the presentation that ISOAR and RAB and the forthcoming journal are really trying to be very sensitive to not privileging certain traditions over others, and has an inclusive approach to what are very different types of research going on in different regions of the world. I think a part of what I'm trying to say here is that we're very interested in learning from these different types of research going on in different parts of the world, and trying to provide a venue for these sort of silos of work that may not be aware of one another to have dialogue. The one thing I would say is if there is a privileging, which is a word I don't want to use, but I'll just say in my own impression, ISOAR and RAB have been a pretty method-centric venue, that can shape. My impression at the most recent RAB was that there was a very pervasive methodological emphasis across presentations. There was data collection and data analysis, sort of transparent reportings of those aspects of the different research projects in ways that other conferences I've been to don't emphasize as much. I don't know if that offends Dr. Baserman.
No. That see, that's inherent in the kind of definition of research,
Right.
and the systematic gathering of evidence and coming to conclusions from that has been a dominant element. And even if there's theory, a theory-oriented talk, or
Right. Exactly.
it needs to be somehow grounded in the research evidence.
Right.
And so that's what makes it different from the practice-based based organization, where personal experience is often very important, and also advocacy for one approach or another is which are good, right? But are not necessarily research, right? Or there are contending definitions of research, and this organization's definition of research is around the systematic gathering of evidence, which is methodology, right?
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, that answers my second question, because my second question is about research methodology, whether there's any particular set of research methodologies that's kind of like foregrounded in those conferences. Because my experience attending that 2021 conference is that I see a lot of like, as Dr. Basilman was saying, like presentations focusing on the very systematic collection of data and the presentation of that data. So would the journal still have that kind of focus, or would, for saying the narrative inquiry or like autoethnographic research, those kind of research will be valued as well?
Well, those methods can be made systematic, right, and transparent. So there's a difference between, let's say, just telling, oh, this is kind of what I remember, and this is how it appears to me, to, okay, I did my best to, these are the steps I went through to bolster my memory. This is what I did to keep records of what went on in my classroom. These are the systematic examination of the student papers, right? All these bring those other approaches to gathering data and try to make them more systematic and at least make transparent the particularity of them. Even if there's always a problem with reproducibility in all sciences, in all areas, but in writing, things are always different, one situation to another. But at least one can become clearer about exactly what one is relying on and how one is collecting it, and organizing and examining what one has collected. Does that make sense?
I'll-
Yeah,
I'll
I
just-
think time is up. Otherwise,
Okay.
I would have asked one. I would have simply responded to one of the questions over there. Dr. Bazerman, I'm Yogesh from Oman. Now I've shifted to Ohio universities with Tallinn. I don't think that you are able to see me. We are working on lifespan research and writing beyond the university context. We would like to be heading a panel in the next RAB. At least that's what is our plan at the moment. Rest of the questions we may not be able to take up at this moment, but yeah, thank you for your presentation.
That would be great. I'm sure lifespan, and I know I've been at the lifespan conferences and part of that collaborative. So, and I know there's a very strong emphasis on trying to gather evidence systematically and think systematically about what does lifespan mean. So,
Yeah.
That would be great to propose a panel.
Thank you.
Conference.
Thank you so much, everyone. This is a wonderful conversation. Keep an eye out for that RAB 2026 CFP.
Sure.
Love to see you in Sydney.
Yeah, and also, if any of you are thinking, at least at some point there will also be a CFP for running the let's see, 2027 to 26, so that'd be 29 conference. And it's been a while since it's been in North America, but it also could be any other part of the world.
Absolutely.
And so you might start thinking about that and what are the institutional possibilities of making that happen, which is not just your own particular institution, but the network, the local network of national network or regional network that would support and that conference, and the way the conference could also work to help bootstrap work in your region.
It's a wonderful suggestion.
Thank you again, everyone.
Bye-bye.